Join the revolution starting inside. An instrumental part of Agora worldwide. Agora worldwide. Agora worldwide. Counter economics. Agorist strip. Black market click. Move a quick flip. Can't regulate this. Agorist strip. Black market click. Move a quick flip. Can't regulate this. Agorist.
Agorist.
Agorist. Nexus. Agorist.
Agorist.
Brandon with the Agorist Acres podcast. I've got my great co-host Dag. How you doing, Dag?
What's up, dude? Doing pretty good, man. How you doing?
Pretty good. Hopefully everybody in Ukraine is just wish for the best, that's all. But we've got a great guest on, Mr. Harding. He's one of our writers, and he does all kinds of stuff behind the scenes. And yeah, we're going to introduce him as a bonus content co-host. So he'll be one of our new co-hosts for bonus content. And I think it's a perfect match because, you know, the kind of content that he goes over a lot of times is, you know, pretty valuable in my eyes. And yeah, I think he can do a really great job in that category and provide you guys with some great stuff. And we'll keep it super cheap. So we'll be on Flow for like $3 a month or something. And Odyssey, like each bonus episode will be around $3. Well, hopefully, I think coming soon. They had mentioned in the email that they were going to do more of like a Patreon where you can subscribe per month or something like that. And yeah, hopefully they're upgrading their platform here pretty soon because they sometimes you get like buffering and stuff, and that was one thing in their latest update email that they said they were working on too. So hopefully they get all situated with that. But yeah, without further ado, how you doing, Jeremiah?
I'm reasonable. Just had my morning tostadas. It's always funny to me when people like they act like preppers or something because they've got like guns and ammo and shit, but they don't know how to cook or like garden or something. So like, congrats, you survived the apocalypse. Now you get to slowly die because you don't know how to do anything and you expected women to do it for you or something. Like, congrats, you did it. So I try to learn to cook as many things as possible for as cheaply as possible. And I made 5 tostadas and a protein bowl for... Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I guess for some people, shooting's more fun than sauteing.
Well, I mean, it might be. I wouldn't actually deny that. It like feeling like John Wick probably feels pretty badass, but like knowing that you could live is like the essential things. Like you gotta learn all the basics. Like I feel like home economics classes and things like that teach you how to, you know, like I forget what it is, but there's like that camp you mentioned on the podcast semi-frequently where the guy teaches people the basics of survival and shit. And like the general vibe I try to give off is learn as many things as possible because someday you won't have access to the internet.
Yeah, absolutely.
That
Yeah.
But yeah,
hopefully not. But you know, it could be. So that's
Tulsi
that's kind of
Gabbard,
our thing around our little farm is whatever we can
Gabbard
do for
brought
ourselves.
that up actually. Maybe last night or the night before, she had said that. And she by the way, she's one of the like World Economic Forum supporters and backers, or she's one of their she's on their list. So she's like she's like in the in crowd, and that, you know, again, everyone thinks she's part of like this, like she can't be bought and she's not corrupted and stuff, which is nonsense. But anyway, she had said that she was saying like all this stuff about Russia and Ukraine and the situation there, and she said it'd be like if Biden goes does a lot. It's going to be tick for tack, and that they'll be, they'll attack Russia could attack our infrastructure via cyber terrorist attack, and bring down our power grid, and I don't know if she mentioned internet, but yeah, it's interesting how a lot of the World Economic Forum, they keep going with this, cyber terrorist attacks, knocking out our infrastructure and power and stuff. And,
Yeah,
and
sure.
I mean, you kind of know it's coming, right? Like, so.
Yeah, well, and so stuff I've been writing, for those of you who don't know, for the Agorist Nexus for years. And one of my first articles at the site predicted basically everything that's happening now. I was on, I get messages from people like, have you heard of the Earn It Act? The Earn IT Act? Have you heard of this? It's so bad. It's so bad. And I'm like, yeah, I heard about it. Here's articles I wrote about it 2 years ago that people called me insane for. So there's that where it's like trying to, encryption is bad, privacy is bad, digital privacy is bad because it can be used to traffic child porn, even though that's already covered under existing legislation, and even though you can't actually stop it by stopping all of our privacy. Let's use that as an excuse to end privacy as we know it. Yeah, that's the rational motive here. So, there's that element of it, and then there's the element where fucking the World Economic Forum and the Bilderberg Group, they're going to create a new world order where they're going to fucking put us all on this biometric identification grid where by way of 5G making it accessible everywhere, smart cameras, fucking gate recognition systems, now they have lasers that can sense who you are by your heartbeat. Because of all of these things that they're building here, they're building a dragnet infrastructure to be attached to a permanent blockchain-based ID system. And who listed out all of these things basically already? Well, the Bilderberg Group. And the Bilderberg Group being Peter Thiel and co, deciding how everything works. The guy behind PayPal and shit. Fucking when people ignore that there are huge consortiums of people who have the opposite of their interests at heart, it's hilarious. And the Davos elite just I think it's really well represented by that Economist magazine thing that I the cover that I posted, where it's got a big hand coming down from the sky, like a big tyrannical government controlling a doctor, controlling a little dog, and everybody's got a mask on. So it's yeah, we need big government, and that's what they were saying. So it's maybe we should listen to them when they're telling us what they're gonna do, and not call people insane conspiracy theorists for listening to them when they tell us what they're going to do. And, there's going to be another opportunity for that where people like me are going to get called insane conspiracy theorists because Bilderberg took 2 years off, allegedly, even though they still could have had the meeting, because it's not like it's on the record or, that anybody knows what's being said anyway. It's off the record in secret. So it's we can't know what they're saying. But there's going to be another opportunity for people to be called insane conspiracy theorists for pointing at the list of topics that they're going to discuss at the next Bilderberg meeting and looking at the list of participants and saying, hey, looks like they're going to be doing this kind of thing and this kind of thing. And then everybody's going to say, hey, you're insane. They're not going to be doing that kind of thing, even though they're saying that they're going to be doing that kind of thing. It's hilarious how much information they just give you and people just don't listen. That's what the event 201 was. It was info on what this whole pandemic was going to be. So it's fucking hilarious when people ignore that stuff and when people act like somebody's an outsider when they're literally involved in that stuff. So
Yeah, it's funny. They say, most of the time they say all this stuff out in the open, and you're right. Nobody takes it to heart. Nobody listens. And yeah, you could see it's funny. The Economist, the magazine you were talking about earlier with the hand and the dog and stuff. If you look at a lot of their covers, it's like, oh, that's what they're going to do next, type of
Yeah,
thing.
it's like a graphic novel.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a Rothschild owned magazine. So, I think a theme for this episode will not only be Panopticon Rising, but I also want to go and we'll go further into what you're talking about here, but I also want to go into, and I think we have to because of the news with Russia and Ukraine, but I want to go into the Ukraine situation, and then also China possibly coordinating with Russia to take Taiwan, because if Putin, you could say a lot of bad things about Putin, right? Like, he, to get into power. Well, Boris Yeltsin wanted Putin to be in power so that none of Yeltsin's stuff would be prosecuted, and his family would be okay and stuff like that. And not only that, but he was like a high member of the KGB, and to make sure he got elected, he had planted bombs and blamed it on Chechen rebels and stuff. So and then also there's rumors that there's a book that came out about how he actually planted the bombs, and in that book it talks about him being a pedophile, and he's one of the richest people in the world too. So I'm, this might all just be theater, but another interesting thing is that he's doing this at a time where America's tired of war. Our economy, the U.S. economy is definitely not going in the right direction. People are tired of the masks and COVID and stuff, and then you've got China on the other side, and it seems to be like they're coordinating to take Taiwan at the same time. So it's kind of like, or definitely could, but yeah, I think that there's something there, and I think it's going to be like, pick your battle, U.S. Like, do you want to deal with this Ukraine situation, or do you want to deal with this Taiwan situation? And yeah, it's very interesting. But I think for the theme of this episode, it's going to be, and I'll let Jeremiah kind of steer wherever we're headed with this thing, but I think it's going to be interesting how this all plays out, and how we lose our liberties, and how the Panopticon rises, and how they'll use this to enslave us further. So, I know I just gave you a lot, Jeremiah, but yeah.
Well, it's always like, I'm against all governments, as I think everyone on this call is, preaching to the choir in that regard. So when I hear stories of Russia being this, looming threat, I always remember that the U.S. was involved in that too. Like, Yeltsin was in direct communication with Clinton about like the implanting of Putin, and Clinton was just like, yeah, that's a great thing. That's fucking awesome. In other words, but like, it's going to be good for our interests, etc. And like, that ended up being true, but at the same time as they were putting in Putin, and basically installing him as a pro-Western dictator, just sort of like they did Pinochet, to when they did that, Clinton was also like, it was around the time when, hey, let's go commit war crimes in Kosovo. Let's bomb the Al Shifa pharmaceutical factory and result in the deaths of like 30,000 Sudanese people. Like, the U.S. is not clean here. And for them to talk about anybody else's human rights violations is always hilarious. And in this particular case, it's yet another example of that, because now that Russia has gotten big and semi-independent, the U.S. has been like teetering on, whether or not we should have some sort of like influence in the region. So let's expand NATO, even though we said we weren't going to, and let's make Ukraine a part of NATO. Let's like jockey for that to be a thing, even though like that was something that was expressly not going to happen. And like, if you want to read more about that, there's an interesting piece on that particular situation. Like, Russia's got a point. It's an op-ed piece from the New York Times or LA Times or one of them, and it's an interesting piece because when you read it, you find out that, hey, maybe there's another side to this story that the mainstream press doesn't want you to know about. Maybe there's like, a reason to be concerned here. And then you look into it and you find out that Ukraine has been shelling the same region for like a really long time now, like for years. And the region has been in constant like sort of like flux. It's like a middle territory, because there's a group of like ethnically Russian separatists in the region, and they want out of Ukraine, and they're like, we want back. and Ukraine's like, no, you can't. And so they've been fucking trying to prevent the separation for a significant period of time now. And then there's like certain parts of those regions who just want independence. And then like Russia's like, well, hey, if they want to be like part of Russia, why don't you just let them be part of Russia? And, Ukraine gets to act like they've been amassing directly just on the border for no reason, when really Ukraine has also been doing the same thing. Like, it's two like world powers jockeying for power, just like they always fucking do. Mm-hmm. And like, if having like bases or like, military equipment or et cetera, on the border of countries is enough to justify a declaration of war or say that war is coming, then the U.S. has no business to talk, being pretty much fucking everywhere. Also, like, they're not only everywhere, but like they directly assist certain groups like Ukraine. Like, that's the reason they had to put up a big old fucking don't give money to the Azov battalion, because, hey, did I mention that Ukraine is full of Nazis, and the Azov battalion is one of those Nazi groups, and that's why they use like the Sonnenrad in the back of their fucking patches and symbology, and that's why they use like modified Schutzstaffel fucking imagery for their shoulder patch, because it's almost like there's a significant Nazi problem, and the U.S. has no problem working with Nazis as long as it's against communism.
Yeah, man, like when you say like, like the super hypocritical, like U.S. with all this, it's always, we got to go over and get involved, or, the government, right? They got to go over and get involved in everything. And so just like looking at just some of I didn't listen to the speech or whatever, because who cares, but like Biden's speech, so a couple little quotes of it, but it's just so funny because I knew this what you were going to see. And it's just nothing but hypocritical statements. Like, okay, just here's a quote. Like, Putin has committed an assault on the very principles that uphold the global peace. And it's like, motherfucker, like, how many countries have you fucking helped invade? Didn't like Obama like start bombing like another 6 or 7 new countries? So it's just it's just fucking ridiculous. And then to the other point you're making, like, it's really interesting seeing how like the media handles stuff like this, because I know that in any sort of conflict like this, the vast majority of the time, both governments suck. Both governments are doing some nonsense they shouldn't be. Like it's usually the case, not always, but usually. exactly. But so like we went out to eat the other night. We're in this restaurant. There's TVs all over the place, and on half the TVs, it's war with Russia, Ukraine situation. It's just all this like. It feels like you're living through some dystopian thing with all like, but it's like they're like priming you for it. It feels like you're definitely being like primed for it. And then now reading like the articles today, everything is like very like, oh, we stand with Ukraine, and you would think that Ukraine is just like this dovish, those poor people
widow
get trampled
guy,
out of this and that, and blah blah blah. Fine people, but obviously their government does awful shit as well, I'm sure, and I don't know that for a fact. I'm assuming, and based on what you're saying right here, it sounds like that's probably true. But it's just so funny how, the way that the media portrays it, that Russia's the big bad evil person, Ukraine's nothing but nice and good. We need to stand with the underdog, and it's. I don't know, man. It's once you see it, you see it all the time, and it's not just being cynical. It's not just being a conspiracy theorist. It's just knowing that they fucking suck.
Right. Well, and to me, okay, so let me just air this out real quick. Conspiracy theorists use facts. A theory is a scientifically tested hypothesis. And when you get to the theory stage, it's because you have tested it and found it to be basically accurate. And then you can find certain laws that you can use to test other hypotheses to turn them into theory. Like gravity is a theory, but I'm pretty sure if you drop your phone, you're not going to be, like, oh shit, is it going to float? No, you're going to be like, oh shit, I dropped my phone. Is it okay? Like so when people dismiss people as conspiracy theorists, it's because they're too stupid to know that conspiracies are happening. And they're also too stupid to know that a theory is a tested hypothesis. So, I'm a conspiracy theorist. I have tested a lot of hypotheses regarding conspiracies, and I have reliable frameworks for understanding the conspiracies that are happening. Yeah, thank you for that compliment that you were too stupid to know that you were giving me. Fucking anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I want to cover is that that it seems like right now Russia is might be taking the whole cake here in terms of the whole entire country of Ukraine, to where previously maybe we had thought he just wanted to take the pro-Russian regions of Ukraine, but there have been flybys and attacks and hits all over the country of the Ukraine. Where do you see it progressing from here?
I mean, first off, that's just general show of force stuff. That always happens. It's like little skirmishes. It's the beginning or the preemption of war, designed as sort of like, in a like a kung fu movie when they're like doing all the moves and they're facing each other, but they're not like actually hitting each other. It's like that. And that's actually a part of martial arts, is that you show a significant enough of the skills that you think would prevent the fight, because your enemy is just like, I don't want that smoke. So the whole point is that it's like posturing. It's very theater-esque right now. And, you brought up earlier the whole like the economy is not going in the right way. Well, it's going in a perfect way for war, because my namesake Harding, like Warren Harding is in the family, and he he got a lot of flack. But part of the reason he got a lot of flack was because he was anti-war and because he was anti-economic intervention. And his response to economic downturn was to say, we should probably just step aside and let the free market handle as much of this as possible, and not get involved in foreign wars, and not fucking waste a bunch of money. And then maybe the economy will get back on track. And he was right. The economy got back on track, and basically he was what spurred the Roaring Twenties. You can read more about his particular exploits in the Myth of the Great Depression. I think it was Lawrence Reed, if I remember correctly. But people don't talk about that, and you're not allowed to bring it up in schools because you're supposed to just assume that Warren Harding was this corrupt, evil person because one of his administration was involved in a scandal. and ignore the rest of what he did and the fact that literally every fucking administration is involved in a scandal. So the whole deal here is that like the economy is going in perfect form for fucking war. They love war when the economic downturns happen, because then they can use the war and the massive amount of spending and government control that comes out of that to paper over the economic devastation that they had just wrought. And what did they just do? Well, they just did something so much worse than what they did in the 40s, which is they massively spiked money printing to paper over the fact that they were doing the greatest wealth transfer in history, killing a bunch of small businesses, forcing reliance on mega corporations, and then telling those mega corporations that everything has to be contact free so that they can pave the way for their biometric fake blockchain based identification system where everybody's going to have no privacy. It's the mark of the beast. It's worse than Revelations. Because you don't even need the mark in your hand or your head. You just fucking go to a place and look at a thing and you're in. You know, you've sold your soul to the fucking Lucifer. So they love this idea of like, let's paper over this most recent economic downturn, which we use to increase our power by doing something else that we can use to increase our power, which is war, which always grows government, always gives them new weapons, always gives them new tactics. In this particular case, it's going to help them test new tank treads and shit in mud and make sure that their vehicles can withstand mud so that they can even go in the mountains in the US, because everything they test in war can be tested on a war against their own people. It's sort of like that thing where Ron Paul was like, you know, all these border walls, you know, you should really consider these walls as not only something that can keep you out, keep other people out, but as something to keep you in. And it's that exact same thing, but with war. And like Biden's already doing, you know, to also bring up Ron Paul, Biden's already doing sanctions on Russia. And Ron Paul accurately said that sanctions are an act of war, because that's what they are. They're like, we're going to stop you from being as economically fruitful because you did X, Y, and Z, no matter that the US has been doing X, Y, Z forever. Like, it's fucking hilarious. People are sharing. I mean, okay, I'm being cynical. I'm an asshole. Everybody knows this. Like, there are very few people in liberty circles who haven't at least heard of how terrible I am. But like, me being terrible aside, the U.S. is in a hilarious position to be discussing any of this, and it's hilarious to watch all these people sharing all this footage of, oh, this territory is getting shelled, this territory, that territory. And these people were basically silent the whole time the U.S. was doing that to other people's countries. You know? So the U.S. has been making other people's countries look like that, and a lot of footage that looks like that has been popping out of conflicts that they've been popping out. But we're not allowed to say that because that makes us sound pro-Russian. It, like, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, like Trump was actually right when he mocked that reporter for like, oh, what about the genocide in China or whatever? And he's like, you know, the U.S. isn't so pure either. He was right. The U.S. isn't so pure, and Western powers aren't so pure. And the hegemony that has been wrought by Western powers has been bloody and brutal, and massacres and civilian deaths and depleted uranium babies, and fucking the most pollution from any organization is the U.S. government. So, like, well, I mean, government in general. The U.S. government just has a lot of it. I think China might be worse than us now, but, like, you know, it's up there. And so for us to be like, you know,
I think the last 100 years, I think the U.S. has been number one if you look at like 100 years. But yeah, I think you're right. China's probably.
But you know, even then it's only because the U.S. has shifted all of our shit ass manufacturing over there. So it's like, it's still the U.S. It's just not the U.S. in the U.S. It's still U.S. dollars going there. It's still U.S. labor going there. It's still the U.S. It's just not in the U.S. Like,
yeah, and I thought like the U.S. military was like the entity that was like the biggest, like out of like even like in like the U.S. like it's like the
for a
military
significant
is, like,
period
the
of the
biggest
time,
fucking
yeah.
polluter, right?
And
Yeah.
and then of course, U.S. companies. Did you know that Texaco? I want everybody to subscribe to Jake Tran. Did you know that Texaco, like heavily fueled the Nazis? Because I knew that, but it's unfortunate how few people knew that. And
I
like
thought most of the big oil guys did.
yeah, well, Texaco fueled like a significant amount of it, and the guy behind it was like a heavy Hitler sympathizer, and then they poisoned like fuck, I can't remember. I think it was like Ecuador, with a huge amount of waste pits. Like I just watched the documentary yesterday, but I can't remember what like the full context of it. But I think it was Ecuador that they just poisoned, and they killed like a huge amount of people with like cancer, or they can't eat food because the water is poisoned with oil, and so Western companies, Western businesses, Western governments, they just fucking destroy everyone else. And then from their bully pulpit, they say, oh, yeah, you can't do that. That's a civil rights violation. Like, what the fuck did you just do? So
Kettle pot.
Yeah. And it's exactly that, because Ukraine is a pro-Western power, but they're also full of Nazis. And they're a pro-Western power that was basically installed. Like the U.S. interfered in their elections too, and put in it's just always hilarious to me when people bring up that, oh, a certain country is guilty of human rights violations, or especially when it's like a certain country is racist. The U.S. has a massively racist past, and is still massively racist. Like, fucking Rage Against the Machine was not wrong when fucking Zach De La Rocha was screaming into the mic that some of those who work forces are the same who burn crosses. Like, there are Nazis in the fucking Ukrainian government that are currently being supported by Western media. The Western media is not willing to discuss the fact that a significant amount of Ukraine is Nazis, and they're not willing to discuss the fact that, like, maybe these are two puppets that the U.S. Intentionally created for specific purposes, and that maybe this is what's already been planned, because the whole point is that we're supposed to just rally around the flag. Oh no, Russia's invading. Ignore the fact that the massive amount of support Russia has in Ukraine, because not all Ukrainians are of one mind on this regard. It's saber rattling. It's the U.S. government deciding that this is the narrative, and everybody just running with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's super convenient because, now people don't really care about protesting as much. I think there's supposed to be like another freedom convoy going to DC in the US, and stuff like that. So I think that this will be a great distraction. And
yeah. Oh, you want to? Okay. So when I wrote my initial articles on the COVID stuff, which again, people laughed at me and called me an insane conspiracy theorist for it, but I was right about like all of it. So fuck them. But just to be very specific, there were lines in the articles about, hey, there were a shit ton of protests and people were angry about police brutality, government overreach, et cetera, et cetera. And then suddenly there weren't, because you couldn't go outside. I wonder why. So it's always fun when people get a rally around the flag moment where everybody's just like, supposed to unite behind the unified message that the fucking orthodoxy puts out. Like, and then, oh, you're too heterodox. We've got to censor you from social media. We've got to cancel you. We've got to, you said a word we didn't like 7 years ago. So we're going to kill your parents. The whole like mob jumps down anybody's throat who doesn't follow the narrative, and this COVID pandemic has been a great way to solidify that mentality, because now, oh, you wouldn't happen to be anti-vax if somebody you're vax hesitant, you did your own research, how dare you? and then like all this stuff is like solidified, a class of people who are just like, don't do your own research, don't even hesitate, take the boosters, support whatever Fauci says this week, even if it's not what he said last week. You do it, prole, you do what we fucking tell you. Like, that's what this is. It's a cult. It's a fucking cult.
Yeah, exactly. And you brought up several great points. Like, before there were all these protests, you had the Yellow Vest and Hong Kong protest, and that was squashed for the COVID nonsense. And these anti-fascists are extremely fascist now. What a coincidence, with what Churchill was saying, that in the future fascists will call themselves anti-fascists, and I believe that was Churchill, anyways. And I had said previously in another podcast that it's really just going to be like one psyop after another, and they're not going to let up. And I think that's because they are trying to drive that last nail in the coffin for complete and total enslavement, in terms like chattel slavery and stuff. So,
well, right. So,
or at least a modern, you'll own nothing, be happy version of it.
Well, and that's still slavery. Notice, okay, so this is something I've brought up a lot. Notice how they say, you'll own nothing and be happy. They don't say, we'll own nothing and be happy. They'll own all of it. It will just be leasing it from them. Be like rent a center for like your fucking toothbrush. Like, oh, you didn't. So the whole thing to me is just transparently propaganda, or saber rattling, or posturing, or and like all these things, just like when you realize they did the same thing with Afghanistan, that they're doing now with Ukraine. Hey, let's fund a far right group of fucking militants. Let's support this far right country, because this country that isn't as far right as we'd like them to be, that being Russia, is being mean in the region. We'll ignore all of the ways that this other country is being mean. We'll just say that Russia's being mean so that we can do like war in the region. They did that with Afghanistan. It's the same thing. They armed, funded and trained the Mujahideen. And then eventually the U.S. government had to make a fucking direct statement that, yeah, we won't fund the Azov battalion. You can fund any other aspect of the Ukrainian government, but you can't fund the Azov battalion because those people are Nazis, and we don't fund Nazis except when we do, because the U.S. does all the time. And now they're just ignoring that that's the way it is. The fucking MSNBC host ran a fucking segment where he was like having people demonstrate. He had this grandma and shit, and she was considered the babushka battalion, like big ass propaganda bullshit on it. Like, you're suddenly allowed to just ignore the fact that they were all wearing the patch for this Nazi battalion. You're allowed to ignore the fact that you were supporting Nazis, because that wouldn't look too good on your woke-y narrative, would it? And MSNBC's got to seem woke. So they just ignored that. They just ignored that while they interviewed these people. Did no pre-interview research, did no due diligence to make sure that they weren't, supporting Nazis. And they just went in there and said, oh, look at this cute, adorable little grandma trying to defend her country, and then ignored the actual thing that they were talking about. And he was clearly out of his element. He needed a translator. He wasn't being an investigative journalist. He was being a fucking stenographer for the military-industrial complex, like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, they're all very, very thankful for his service. And like all the fucking mouthpieces being all like, oh yeah, Russia's the only bad guy here.
So you had said what we're supporting whoever over yonder. There's a couple things that I saw. So there's, I guess, here recently because of this new thing with Ukraine and Russia, right? So we're putting or increasing sanctions, which obviously we know are terrible affect the poorest people, act of war, etc. Looks like they've sent several thousand. I saw a figure that was like 7,000 troops to Ukraine. Looks like we provide them with $650 million in quote unquote defensive assistance every year. So like that's a lot of fucking money. So what is that? Is that like to buy arms? Is that to support these groups that you're talking about? Is that what's funding that?
I mean, partially because the Azov Battalion is a unit of the
what else is the U.S. doing over there?
Well, I mean, partially because like the Azov Battalion is a unit of their National Guard. It's not an actual military thing. But their National Guard is designed to supplement their military, as is every. So I posted about this on Twitter, and it was fucking hilarious. There's always at least one person, and this one person, I said that it's a militia, and this one person's like, Azov, despite being a massive group of skinheads, is literally part of the Ukrainian National Guard. It isn't a militia. And he was like very sure of himself. But I was like, you should brush up on what militias are, because the militia is a general term for anybody able-bodied that can defend their country. Militia is simply a supplementary force to the regular military, and a National Guard is a type of militia. Nice try, though, and I included screenshots in all my sources. I haven't gotten a response from that person, probably won't, but I don't care because I posted everything in his thread too, so the more people retweet his bullshit, the more people will be able to see, hey, yeah, that's bullshit. So the U.S. is funding their national defense, etc., but they're like directly working with these Nazis, and there's a significant amount of a Nazi presence in their actual government, and like just Nazis, you know? So maybe instead of supporting that government, we could like feed the homeless here. We could deal with her. We house the homeless, you know, fucking give people, like, forgive them their student debt, things that like would lead to a tangible result here of lessened economic strain for greater economic development. You know, maybe that's what we could do instead of supporting governments which are heavily saturated with Nazis. No, you can't do that. That'd be practical and good for people. You got to put that money where your mouth is, which is the war machine.
So, I mean, obviously, you know that anything to keep the war machine going is a plus, right?
Yeah.
But like, so I think Brandon mentioned this earlier. You know, like I feel like people in general, like the citizens of, you know, like the U.S. have a bit of like war fatigue. Like this has been going on for a really long time. Do you think? And like, so obviously they lie, right? But like they're saying, oh, we don't want, you know, we're not gonna go to war over this. We're just gonna protect NATO, whatever that means. But do you think that they are really pushing for like a hot war? Or do you think they just be satisfied with getting the Cold War back? You know, that's kind of a little bit easier, but they still get to spend a ton of money on weapons. Or do you think they're pushing for something a little bit harder?
It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Like they don't care. They're not. If they get a hot war, it's just, you know, they don't have to put it in the microwave. Like it's already a hot war. There is no real Cold War. The thing is that like there hasn't been a period of peace around the fucking world for like ever. And the idea that there has been one is propaganda, I think is the best word. So the idea that there's been a Cold War when the U.S. was actively pushing like positions and killing people at the same time, or, you know, using that as a pretext to learn how to control people's minds. That's what MK Ultra was. Like, oh, those Ruskies, they might be learning how mind control works. So we've got to learn how mind control works better and first. So it's always designed to increase their power, and they've never decreased their power. My mother had a way of putting this that, you know, she kind of hates how extremist I've gotten, but like, she's one of the reasons there, because she had this way of putting it where it was like, you know, the government loves getting more power, but they never give any of it up. So it's like they she's like also fucking, she got me into Heinlein and all this stuff. Not that I'm blaming my mother for like, you know, my radicalism, but, you know, I might be. The whole point though is that like they fucking did this on purpose, and they do this on purpose, and they do it to increase their power like a ratchet mechanism. You know, like you pull the ratchet mechanism and then it loosens up when you push it back to its previous position, and then you pull it again and you hear those little click 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 click. It's keeping it in that position, and as long as you don't keep it in that position beyond the tensile strength of the mechanism, you can keep ratcheting it as much as you want. So they just need to keep the tensile strength of the mechanism high, and then they can just ratchet and ratchet and ratchet, and every time get incrementally a little bit tighter control over everything in the economy, in private sector, in fucking your bedroom with this new Texas anti-trans law, in your personal life with the anti-privacy measures that they're putting in place and the anti-encryption measures. Like, they'll just keep on ratcheting a little bit more every time. And that's what they want these sorts of wars for. Because then they can just keep ratcheting every single fucking time. And they don't need to worry about, giving a reason that makes sense for the common person. Because if they keep the war pigs in money, then they can keep on making war equipment. And so they just need to print more, get more defense budget, get more emergency appropriations bills, and do all of this to stimulate the economy. And then the economy gets to be stimulated into, fucking, we can ignore the fact that we just printed more money than, ever very recently. We can ignore the fact that we basically just tripled the national debt. We can ignore all of that because you know what? Gosh darn it. We the money supply and impacted the national debt because gosh darn it, you know what? We got countries to defend from these big bad people, these poor innocent little countries to defend from these big bad people. And, the U.S. can ignore that they both emplaced the Ukraine government and also the Russian government. And they're basically responsible for puppet dictatorships all over the world, including here. And it's nothing more than a stage show. It's nothing. It's not real.
All right, let's take a quick second to shout out Agorist Acres Seeds. AgoristAcres.com stocks a variety of seeds for your garden or homestead. They also have really cool packaging instead of those silly paper envelopes.
Buy seeds with crypto, support the counter economy, and become self-sustaining today. Agorist Acres offers fast shipping so you can get started right away.
Make sure you use code Nexus10 at the checkout for 10% off of your orders. Also, they will donate a portion of the sale to Agorist Nexus, helping to bring you all the great content you expect. And all right, let's get on with it.
Yeah. It's really just some people, pulling strings at the top. And where do you see China going with this? Do you believe China is going to take Taiwan and be opportunistic here, or how do you think China's going to play this out?
I mean, maybe if they wanted to, they could certainly make some moves there, but they're already on thin ice internationally speaking because of the whole we're gonna maybe start to take you seriously now as a threat, but maybe we'll also start to criticize you a little bit instead of just letting you do all these terrible things. But, it's still funny because people aren't willing to stop supporting Chinese companies. They're still willing to do it. They're still willing to use Tencent authorized apps, play Tencent authorized video games. They're still willing to, do deals with whatever Chinese company hasn't been blacklisted by the U.S. yet. So, I mean, it's all virtue signaling there too. But China might. I don't foresee that happening soon. I don't think it's going to happen now because that would spread things too thin anyway. And I think the region's already going to be pretty hot. And if you'll notice, all the flight patterns and paths, they all diverted around Ukraine because there's suddenly a hot conflict in the region. China can't afford that loss of commerce and travel. So I just don't envision that right now.
Yeah, interesting. I think it will happen. I just think that they're waiting for the opportunistic moment, and whether that's a month or 2 months from now, who knows? Because they want Chinese, they want Taiwan, and they're going to get it some way or another,
I mean, probably.
and they can probably take it very quickly. And in terms of like people traveling, I think you really can't travel to China. I think there really hasn't been any travel to China since this whole COVID thing started. So yeah, I'm not sure that there's much of a concern in terms of like tourism or anything like that, and they're still exporting. So
China currently allows foreign nationals with valid residence permits and visas to enter the country under certain very limited conditions.
Well, knowing China, it's extremely limited. So
Right.
like unless you've got like a spouse that's like
But they need
has
those.
Chinese citizenship.
They
and
need
stuff
those
like that.
businessmen because those are their contacts to the rest of the world. So I don't think they're gonna rock the boat too much right now. I think personally that if you're looking at that, it'd be like a few months out, maybe like May or June. Like,
Yeah, yeah, definitely a couple months. Yeah.
but that's if it happens. That's if it like there's a possibility that there's enough momentum against this sort of thing that it wouldn't happen to begin with. Like, and my fucking post got quote tweeted by somebody who spread it to at this point like 271 people who now know that hey, maybe the West is helping a bunch of Nazis. So it's a good thing that there's like an information highway right now going in that direction because like ultimately like we just need to remind people that all these powers have already been entrenched for a really long time now and this isn't actually new or news. Like these people have been literally shelling each other for a while now, and like the fact that they're actively moving into the region, that's just like it's a tiny ratchet more. It's nothing more than that. Like it's been happening. It's not new, and like the government has even been like shelling that region as well. They've been doing the same stuff Russia is now doing and getting away with it with basically no press coverage. And then of course they had to. You can tell that this is like posturing a little bit, at least because the official Twitter for the Ukraine government is tweeting out fucking political cartoons where Hitler is raising a little baby Putin. And I'm not making this up. It's like a political cartoon where
Yeah, I
it's
saw that.
designed to make Putin look like a baby that Hitler is very proud of. So it's clear what's happening. It's that, a bunch of hypocritical world powers are calling each other racist when in fact they are racist, Nazis when in fact they are Nazis, or things like that. Like maybe don't like claim to be some innocent like poor little like baby who's in need of defense and then like call that of somebody else. Like maybe don't provoke tensions at the same time as you're saying we need a drawdown. Like they know exactly what they're doing. They and it's always funny because I posted on my timeline, I said, and they said Trump would be the one to start a war on Twitter. Like this is the modern day landscape where people are like complaining about what they're doing when somebody else does it and calling the kettle black and a variety of other things to ratchet up tensions so just enough that they can get like more power. And that's exactly what this is. Ukraine wants more power just like every other government does, and failing to realize that is going to cause a lot of people to support war that they otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, I think like realizing that this is just like, it's the same old thing that's always been going on. You look like, I think, what is it, an Agorist primer, where Conker basically goes through like every war and talks about the false flag that started it. It's every time it's something, it's always lies. It's just more of the same old nonsense, man. I just don't understand how people don't realize it by now. How they still buy into it. You still have true believers. I don't know, man. It's crazy. I mean, I was at one point, so I don't know.
Yeah,
sometimes
well,
it's disheartening.
Yeah, well, that's why it falls to people like us to be like, you know what? They've been posturing like this for a while, and everybody's been involved in doing this. And maybe the real reason why this is all being given such heavy press coverage is because the war machine needs more propaganda for its next major war so that it can justify increased spending in its sectors and profit a huge amount. Maybe this economy is controlled by a bunch of evil people who don't care who dies as long as they can correct the economic, fucking catastrophe that they've caused with something that will increase their power, rather than with saying, hey, maybe we should just like let the dollar die like it's going to eventually anyway, inevitably. And maybe we should let the dollar die and not try to resurrect it with a bunch of bloodshed. No, you can't do that. You can't say that. That's evil. I'm anti-American and I deserve to go to Guantanamo or something.
Now, what kind of losses of freedom, what kind of power grabs are they looking to get out of this thing? Okay, so for instance, 9/11, they were, they put in place the Patriot Act, which, we all know what kind of powers they got from that, right? They can spy on American citizens, and the NDAA, that too, and yeah, so, and then COVID gave them lots of power. So, but where do you see like a conflict with Russia and China? Where's this going from us with these conflicts?
So, all right, the general vibe that people should be looking for is Cold War II Electric Boogaloo. So, like, they're looking for the same kinds of sentiments as before. They already ratcheted up tensions in that same way with the global media being like, "Oh, Trump is an evil Trump is an evil fucking Russia colluder." So now everybody, it's going to move from being anti-vax to being a Russia colluder, and they're going to use the same Cold War tactics they did, but with much better anti-freedom measures already in place to, like, silence and strip citizens of rights, and et cetera, et cetera. And what's interesting is that, like, this is Biden gets to like fucking yutch all these troops out of Afghanistan. The U.S. government funded the Mujahideen through Operation Cyclone. The U.S. government funded the Mujahideen so that they could like have an enemy there to fight, right? And then they had an enemy there to fight, so they fought that enemy there for a bit. And they funded bin Laden's camp in Khost back when they were still calling him Tim Osman. And then eventually the passports were perfectly preserved at the bottom of the towers, which totally weren't destroyed by explosions in the sub-basement, which is why World Trade Center 7 went down in the exact same way with no planes hitting it at all. They suddenly had these patsies because the U.S. government was like, oh yeah, bin Laden did it, like almost immediately. Without any real knowledge of the situation or like any sort of impetus, because of course they had already planned that he was going to be their fall guy, the guy that they funded. And this was right after they gave $53 million to the Taliban. so that they could, prosecute opium and keep it prohibited. But they were just exporting more opium than ever because they had a bunch of confiscated opium that they could sell. So they did that. And then the U.S. government had like Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, ISIS, the Taliban, all these terrible boogeymen in the region, so that they could justify all of these losses of freedom and all of these civilian casualties and all of this war that wasn't war because they didn't need congressional approval to send in some military action or, status of forces agreements or whatever. Like, they didn't need that, fucking veneer of democracy over it because they could just do it because there was a terror threat in the region and we're fighting a war on terror. So they had all these threats in the region that they basically groomed and funded and shit. And they then used those as the pretext for all of the losses of freedom you mentioned. And the U.S. government suddenly puts in people like the people who run Ukraine and puts in people like Putin so that they have two puppet dictatorships to sort of fight each other. And then these two puppet dictatorships sort of fight each other. And this was like right hot on the heels of, Biden leaving Afghanistan. So it looks like we need another Afghanistan. That'll be the way that we solve problems. And we won't even be called racist because these people are white people. So we can get away with killing them and their civilians much more safely without social justice people being like upset about it. You can get all of them off your back because it's not bombing brown people. Now it's bombing white people. So you can, so the whole thing is like pretext for that sort of thing. And it's right hot on the heels of just like, oh, we suddenly have a bunch of troops who don't have anything to do. Let's give them a job. So they're in Ukraine now, and the Biden family so happens to have financial ties to people in Ukraine. So, it's not emoluments when he does it. It's not, corruption on a grand scale when Biden is the one with like family business in the region that's benefiting from his military action. No. So my point in saying all of this is that you're going to see the same stuff, but ratcheted up. So now that we've got all these new laws in place, it's going to be much easier to go against somebody's freedoms because there's all these new things. And there's going to be a biometric ID system hooked up to your finances that they can say, "Hey, you expressed too much of a pro-Russian sentiment. Are you with them? We'll interrogate you and freeze your assets, like they did Justin Trudeau did in Canada. We'll do that. We'll cut off your social media. We'll blacklist you, just like we do anyone we don't like now." You won't be able to speak. You won't be able to spend money. You won't be able to do anything because we said so. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at this being a test bed for the military and intelligence industrial complexes, flexing their new ability to do whatever war they want with very little ability to protest jack fucking shit, because that's the way this is all going. And it's all based on, it doesn't matter who wins, the U.S. wins. Because the U.S. put in the Russian dictatorship and the U.S. put in the Ukraine dictatorship. So if either one of those wins, the U.S. is still basically going to get unscathed. And people don't care that they're being used as pawns because they're either not being told this or they flatly reject it. Fucking that. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at, a global tyranny of like, fucking Starlink putting internet everywhere, including off-grid, 5G putting the same kind of internet in really strong concentration anywhere they want to put a tower and a device, seamless integration of extremely low latency video feed with fucking deep fakes as well now, which basically means that they can make it look like anybody is saying anything they want them to. We're looking at dystopia. We're looking at hell. We're looking. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. This is all going to end in rivers of blood and years of darkness, the likes of which will make Revelation look like a children's story. That's what we're looking at.
Oh, I'm glad we've got something to look forward to then. This gives them a lot too. I mean, in terms of like distraction, economic scapegoat. I mean, they're already scapegoating Ukraine for higher gas prices, and we hadn't even fully sanctioned Russia yet. And well, I mean, sanctioning Russia and goods not going both ways from Russia to Europe and from Russia to the U.S. That is going to make a difference in gas prices. But for them to already be saying that a couple of days ago was, obviously idiotic. But yeah, then you've got the U.S. constantly saying, "Oh, Russian hackers" and all this stuff, and Tulsi Gabbard bringing up the cyber terrorist attacks on our infrastructure and power grid and stuff, and yeah, it's going to be, it's definitely going to be interesting. I think, unless there's something else you wanted to bring up, Jeremiah and Dag, I think we're coming close to an end here.
No, this was great. I always feel like such a dummy when it comes to foreign policy stuff, because even like if it's something I read about or understand the general gist, it's a lot of names, it's a lot of places, it's a lot of times, and my memory just isn't very good. So I feel like such a dummy when we talk about foreign policy stuff. But it's like, I don't know, man. It's fascinating. I think it's good to know what's going on, but it's also one of those things that it's like, there's, other than, like Jeremiah pointed out, teach people that this is what happens. It's like there's not really much I can do from sitting over here, to affect it. So it's, I don't know. I don't know what my point of saying that is. It's just, it's one of those things that goes on, and it's unfortunate because ultimately it's a lot of pain and suffering that goes on for a lot of people. Like war is really terrible, and we're, I guess you can say fortunate that it doesn't happen on our front doors, in that method. Not yet.
Well, yeah,
but my lifetime. But
that's the thing. Like, in terms of that, if that ever does happen, it'll be fucking. This is where I'm going to sound like a cynical asshole again, but like, it's going to be hilarious to see if like the U.S. actually has any defense capabilities, if that ever actually happens here, because the U.S. has been spending its defense dollars on offense this whole time. So it'll be interesting to see if like there is an attack here, if the U.S. government is actually good at defending itself, or, full of shit.
Yeah. Well, all just the citizenry that tends to be like, pro-war, pro, quote unquote defense, right? Is like, they've never actually seen the ramifications of the policies that they want, so yeah, I think it will be pretty, I don't know, not funny, but, kind of funny, for all those people to say, oh yeah, this is what it's like in all those other countries. This is the stuff that you're pushing for because, we can't risk, the terrorists getting a bomb or whatever. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, and of course, like the whole thing that needs to happen, in order for these things to kick off, in order for the dystopia to happen, you need to have an external impetus, and you need to have people rallying around the flag in order to get that external impetus. So ultimately, the goal of the military and intelligence industrial complexes needs to be to give people that impetus. So they give what David Icke would. By the way, people should actually read David Icke instead of just like complaining about the things that they hear about him, because like he actually has a significant amount of good points. You can ignore the parts you don't like. Really, just read it anyway. So one of the things he talks about is the problem reaction solution model. We create a problem, we have a pre-manufactured solution to the problem, and we manipulate your reaction in order to guide you toward that solution. And what does that solution do? It increases our profit and power and shit. It's Ordo ab Chaos. It's fucking. There was an episode of Sonic X where Eggman had destroyed half the moon, and he had used his own technology to maneuver the moon into position between the sun and Earth to block the sunlight from the Earth, thus effectively forcing them onto his machines, which produced artificial sunlight. They were also fucking brainwashing and hypnotizing people to be like, yeah, pro Eggman. So, like, even Sonic knows problem reaction solution, and he was around destroying these generators and shit until the military industrial complex had to listen to him and say, maybe we shouldn't be like accepting fascism just because, you know, this guy says he's on our side now. Maybe we should like recognize the villain for what he's always been, a villain. And, you know, like in the end, Sonic won. But in real life, that doesn't happen. People just go on believing that the state has their best interests at heart, even after seeing the problem reaction solution model going on for so long. They just keep the sunlight generators going and cheering for Eggman because that's the way they've been programmed to be since they were kids, you know? Collective punishment, believe your elders, you know, share, even if it doesn't make sense to share. All these propaganda tools designed to get you to work your way into the collective as like mindless consumers of their, you know, products, their information, their lifestyles. And they specifically did that in a way very similar to Eggman's sunlight generators through the TV and the media and shit. And if you want to learn more about that, you should watch True Stream Media's The Minds of Men, because it's very fucking good. If you ever have 4 hours and you want to be incredibly depressed, watch that.
Oh man, well, you know, I got to say, man, I'm glad that you're going to be here helping us out with more content and everything. I, you know, even if I don't agree with you, I always want to hear what you have to say on pretty much any subject because A, you're very well researched, and B, you have a tendency of making me look at things from an angle that I wouldn't have otherwise. So
the cynical
you know,
asshole, slightly insane angle.
yeah, that thing. So, so I appreciate that. I'm glad you're going to be here helping us out a little bit.
Yeah.
Great conversation today with Jeremiah, and we always appreciate having him on. We're gonna start having him on every Sunday to talk about bonus content. We're going to have, you know, we're especially going to go over topics that I really like, things that we believe that will provide you value, things in the crypto space, things like that. So yeah, look forward to that every Sunday. And, you know, that's a great way to support us, you know, very cheaply and to get some extra stuff. So, so yeah, you know, we definitely have to keep the lights on somehow, some way. And yeah, anybody who wants to support us, I just can't, I can't thank you enough. And everybody who has done so in the past, you know, Presearch, and then we've had a couple anonymous donors that I can't thank enough. But yeah, for the most part, I've paid out of pocket for Agorist Nexus without really expecting too much, you know, too much out of it. So yeah, I think we're really just trying to be more self-sufficient in that manner. And, you know, self-sufficiency is important, regardless, you know, whether it's there's like a motorcycle driving by, regardless if it's a decentralized organization or a somewhat centralized one. So yeah, with that said, I think Jeremiah's got a good quote for us here. So
yeah, I think in order to round this out and also piss off a certain group of people who don't like me, I'm gonna remind people that, like, you know, they might draft if this is going to turn into a hot war. They might force you onto some sort of support structure for their machine. They might try to get you like to support them. They might try to get you to go toward what they're suggesting rather than going away from it. And this might get a significant amount of people who aren't sure about whether or not they want to support the system. this might get them worried. But, you know.
Oh, I was thinking last night, this is why they wanted to do selective service, aka draft for women.
Yeah. Fucking Starship Troopers style, you know. I'm doing my part.
If you remember. And then they had the draft propaganda with what was that one movie? Yeah,
I was just thinking that.
Then they had that draft
jobs.
That draft propaganda with what was that movie? What was that movie? Tomorrow's War or something?
Oh yeah. It's I forget what it's called specifically, but it has like fucking
with Chris Pratt.
Yeah, and he goes into the future. It doesn't make any sense in terms of the timeline itself. It makes zero fucking sense. But like, you know, it's an action movie. It doesn't have to make sense. And it's like, you know, oh, let's go into the future to save our current self. And you've been chosen because we said so. So you're going in, and it doesn't matter whether it makes any fucking sense or not. It's not a very good movie. Anyway, yeah, that thing. But yeah, like if you decide that you're worried about this,
propaganda movies don't really make sense. But
yeah, no, they don't need.
But yeah,
they just
it
need to
gives
get
you
people
that
all
sense
rah-rah.
of like, yeah, exactly. Like we've got a good reason why we're selecting you, but we can't necessarily go over those details. But yeah, it's for the greater good. So yeah, if you try to leave the draft with this implantable that we gave you, then yeah, we'll know exactly where you are, and we'll find you. You know?
Yeah, Suicide Squad style. Yeah. So ultimately, like,
exactly.
The reason I brought all that up is because it ties nicely into the quote. You know, if you're worried about this, if you're worried about like what they'll do to you, if you're worried about the state of your neighborhood or your country or your family, just do what Sonic says. If you have time to worry, then run.
Agorist Nexus is out.
I'm plugged into the Agorist Nexus. We need the whole community connected. We're the alternative collective. Self-sufficient and effective. Self-sufficient and effective. Each one takes one and effective. Self-sufficient and effective. Yeah. Free Knox.